Wow, Dhanishta Nakshatra. You know, I I'm very funny, man. So I was got done the last class, and then I sat down and I started looking at Dhanishta notes for a couple of days, and I looked at it and thought, I don't know Dhanishta. I'm gonna have to cancel my class. I don't know anything. Um, and then I've since then I've had a flood on Dhanishta and my mind, and I'm going a little bit crazy at this point on Dhanishta. So that's where we sit. I found out quite a bit. Um, so Dhanishta, like sands through the hourglass. So these are the days of our lives. Um, that used to be an old soap opera in North America back when wow, that was the days of soap operas, I think. Anyways, that's really Dhanishta. The sand, like sands through the hourglass. So are the days of our lives. Um, and that's interesting. So the one of the main symbols of Dhanishta is the drum, and they talk about it being Shiva's Damaru drum. And so if we look at Shiva's Damaru, it looks a whole lot like an hourglass. And one of the things about Dhanishta's time becomes very important. Time and space actually become commodities, basically, in Dhanishta. Uh, so, well, I'm just going to jump right into this. So they talk about the drum, and we always think that they're talking about like a little musical drum, but drums are drums are drums are drums. And one of the big things this points to is several things. It points to containment as a very important word for Dhanishta, uh, being contained, and then the drum also stands for kind of reverberation. It's almost like an echo. So when we're thinking about the drums, we're thinking about all the kinds of storage drums. We're thinking of how even like a know what I'm saying drums. Try to think of like a barrel is really another good way to look at this. A barrel or really any kind of container is belonging with Dhanishta. Now we mentioned the time and space. That's so interesting, Dhanishta, and really time and space do they both become involved here. And like I say, they both kind of become commodities. And so the whole thing becomes trying to save time and save space. And in a way, what they're trying to do is Danishas are trying to basically stretch out the fabric of time, you could say. Um, and they're also trying to make more space. So this is another thing that goes with Danishta is that idea of stretching the skin, right? We've got that barrel, we've got the drum, and they stretch that skin over, and it really sort of depends on how tight that skin is stretched, that how much reverberation you're going to get when you beat on it. One of the other interesting things about the way they sort of tie down this this skin, I guess, and tie down is another really good word for Danishta, by the way. Um, there is that sort of sense of being tied down, whereas Shravan was sort of this kind of being held down to a certain degree. Um, but anyway, so you get this idea of being tied down, and if we look at the way they tie down a drum, they they sort of have to. The important thing is they have to stretch it fairly evenly around every which way. And then what happens? This is sort of becomes like apples in a way, right? One bad apple ruins the whole bunch, and that's very much in Dhanishta. It's like the when you're tying down the string. If you pull one too tight, all of a sudden the whole thing goes off. So all those it has to have the same equal tightness all the way around. There can't be any difference in the way people are treated in Dhanishta. Everyone's treated the same. Now, one of the images that kept couple of the images that kept coming up with Danish, it has a lot to do with the fuel as well and efficiency. Really, really big on efficiency. I don't know if it's quite the fuel, um, but it's certainly the oils and the greases and all that sort of stuff that. But I do think the fuel is involved here. It's right across from Leo. Leo's the fire, and so really what's being burned, I think, is mostly coming out of Danishta. So you get all the kind of oils in there. You get the edible oils in there. You get, geez, pretty much anything you can make a fire from. But one of the images that kept coming up with this was this idea of like trucks filled with coal, trucks hauling grain, trucks hauling these things. They're full of like we think of grain or not even grain, aggregate and stuff, like what they're building the sand and gravel and all this stuff. And what's happened is in Shravan, all of this stuff, Shravan, everything's just worthless, basically. Everything is kind of debris. It has no value to it, really. Whereas in Dhanishta, all of a sudden, those rocks have actual value. Right? They're worth something. Not just one rock, though. One rock is worth nothing. But if you've got 100,000 rocks, all of a sudden they're worth something. And that's sort of Dhanishta. It's like all of these, it's like a whole truck full of rocks that are all the same, but different, I guess. There's usually some kind of a testing that goes into Dhanishta, and this might become more rigorous as we get into the Aquarius sides of Dhanishta. Um, and it's sort of testing of like, it's like the apples, right? You've got all these apples going on the load, but you have to make sure one bad apple gets in the load, the whole thing is ruined. And so there's a sense of sort of watching out for those bad apples and keeping them out and from ruining the rest, kind of a sort of thing. And so there's a bit of a sorting going on here. Now, the star of symphony, the power to give abundance and fame. Uh, we'll just scroll down. There's a few. The most famous, the swiftest, the most heard of. So I think the most heard of is probably a good way to, probably the best of those words, I think. Excuse me. Because the most heard of, it's kind of like, again, there's an echoing sound here. I think tunnels become involved here. Anywhere you're going to get that echo. It's like if you go into an empty grain bin and there's that echoey sound, you go into a big, like a big stadium or a big warehouse, these kind of things with that really high roof and all those acoustics in there. And so that's really that sort of most heard of. It's kind of like there's sort of an expansion. Oh, I'll get to this a little later, but there's sort of an expansion and a contraction are both going on here. And so it's like, well, especially when we get to the Aquarius side of this, it's like here you are, you've got all these rocks or all these grain that are they're selected based on one kind of grain. Here's our standard for measurement, and everything else gets measured against that kind of thing. It's like here's your Leo, here's your superstar, and then in Aquarius you have all these people that are sort of like they're copying, they're an echo of what that original superstar is doing. And so then you get like the John Lennon glasses out there. Everybody's wearing John Lennon glasses. And it's kind of funny because Aquarius is like Aquarius, or especially the Dhanishta, is kind of funny because it's just like there's no difference to Aquarius. Every rock in there, every stone in the load is kind of the same. But what they're trying to do is there's an attempt to sort of distinguish themselves here. But how the Aquarians are distinguishing themselves is they're looking at someone like John Lennon and they're going, oh, I'm going to be unique like John Lennon, so I'm going to wear some John Lennon glasses, right? And so that uniqueness isn't really there. It's a copy. It's an echo. Is kind of what's happening in Dhanishta. And so, what else? We get the eight Vasudevas. And now this is interesting because I think this really speaks of the symphony because you get all these different sections, all these different areas, and they're all working together. And this sort of this kind of goes towards the transportation of well, there's a couple things going on because they're transporting kind of the liquid sort of stuff. They're transporting the cancery stuff, you could say, is being put into those empty barrels, or the mineral type stuff of Leo is being put into those barrels. And here they're sort of barrels or truckloads. As we get up to the end of Aquarius, all of these things are being hitched together, so it becomes more of a train. But for now, it's these sort of individual loads. I really see One of the things I love about India, you're walking through the rural areas and you see these like these ox carts or something, and they're full of whatever, full of wheat or whatever they're full of, or cotton. But it's like this overstuffed, big overstuffed sort of cart. It's like, oh my God, you're looking at this thing and the load is 20 times bigger than the cart. And that's sort of Dhanishta. They've got to tie that down. They've got to really hold it down. This is also that idea, like Shravan was sort of this law of averages, very sort of average and very sort of normal. And Aquarius and Dhanishta is similar, but this is more like it's like the masses are trying to pull you down. You know, if you go step out into the world and you're wearing some clothes and some style that's like, well, if I went out in the world right now, I'm dressed like Indian Baba, a lot of time at home. But if I go out in the world in Canada dressed like Indian Baba, there's going to be some social repercussions. And so what's going to happen is because all of society sort of thinks that's strange, slowly, I'll put my Canadian clothes back on. I'm going to sort of conform. And there's a conformity here in Dhanishta like that. But it's a sort of conformity. Osho warns about this. You go off, spend some time in the ashram, you become enlightened, you make this great spiritual connections. And then when you go back home and you go back to the world, nobody likes to see you happy. Everybody's trying to pull you back down to their level. And that's kind of what Dhanishta is trying to do, right? You've passed through Leo, you found yourself, you're an individual, you're kind of you're free person, and there's a lot of freedom over there on the sun side. But as soon as you attain that freedom, all those millions and the masses are going to say, no, 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 come back down here with me. And so there is a lot of that downward force, but it's not in Shravan. I think it was just sort of the force of gravity that was moving downward. But in Dhanishta, we've got a dynamic being pulled down. Same as those tarps on the truck, same as that the skin of the skin of the drum. So we get that kind of hollowness, and we get everything sort of working together. Now there's the Durava. Where is it? Yeah, the Durava. Durava is the pole star. That's the fixed star. We call it the North Star, and everything's kind of revolving around that. And I really did sort of I kept coming up with these sorts of ideas, or these as I was doing the research, it would be like, oh, a team of 7 went out in the boat with their capsule to explore the bottom of the ocean. And so what it seemed to be is these sort of, I don't know what number I just said, but these teams of 7 plus something that all 7 of those people are sort of revolving around, sort of thing. So it's like there's a capsule or a pod or those sorts of kind of words can all be used. So we get that hollowness, that emptiness, that sense of empty vessel as well. I talked about how Shravan is very much like hell. And of course, we're moving towards Purvabhadrapada now, right? Which is the diabolical one at the end. Oh, geez, that's when my mind blew up. So I don't know if you guys have read Dante's Inferno, but he goes down through and he goes through all these different circles of hell. Let's just, you don't mind if we skip ahead. I do that all the time. Dante, where are you? I don't know what I did with Dante's Inferno. But anyways, it's all these sort of cycles of hell going on in Dante's Inferno. Um, Sorry, I think my mind got confused. I'll bet you I added Dante's Inferno to Shravan. Sorry. Um, Anyways, Dante's Inferno goes to Shravan. I couldn't get out of Shravan this week while I was doing this. Um, so you get the 8 Vastus, the 8 directions, the I'm gonna go back up here. Sorry, let's start this again. So we'll get back up here again, and we'll just rewind because otherwise I'll skip all of this.
Good.
So
Stick to the script, Mike.
what's that? What's that, Emmett?
Stick to the script, Mike.
Oh, there's a script here. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just like everybody else does, I'll do my best, guys. I'm not really good at this sort of thing. Um, so yeah, that's probably why Scorpios are known. That Scorpios have a tough time with work. They don't keep a job for very long, and that's probably because they have Leo in their 10th house, and so they're not conforming. They don't want an average job, and so anyways, so here I am with my unaverage job. Um, doing my best to yeah, anyways. So the rulership of this is men without pride, eunuchs, fast friends, men who are hated by women, charitable persons, very wealthy people, peaceful and self-controlled people. You know, these things, men who are hated by women, these little things, I wonder about that. It's like, why do women hate these guys? And well, this goes back to what's the one thing women are most afraid of more than anything in this whole world? Of being tied down, of being held down, this sort of thing. And so these are the kind of men who that's what they do. They hold you down, they tie people down. And women don't like that. And so I think that's a big part of the reason women don't really like this nakshatra. Now, men without pride. Again, there's a sense here where it's yeah. Go ahead, Emmett.
As a Dhanishta moon, the women, I'd say, like when they don't like me, I think it's also because like I can't be controlled. Like I can't be tied down as well. So they don't like the fact that I go to my own drum. I don't necessarily follow a specific thing. So they have trouble finding safety with me because I'm not like typical kind of follow that same path. I don't know if that
Well,
applies or that makes sense.
well, I think there's also a side of Dhanishta where it's a fairly sort of rigorous testing as well, and so they're testing the partner a lot. Um, and well, what kind of partner is going to like that? um, yeah, so there's that side to it as well, I think. Um, so when Saturn is transiting Dhanishta, Saturn causes victory to the kings of Magadha and the prosperity of treasurers, bankers, and all the like. Um, and this is like, why would the bank? This worked very well with. It actually still works quite well with Taurus, who's the banker, because of course the bankers they have things to store, and here in Dhanishta you're getting all these empty storage barrels, and so they work very well together that way. Dhanishta is all about maintenance, just keeping things moving and keeping things moving slow, and this is really like this is the machine. Like when we use that in the metaphorical sense of it's sort of this public-private partnerships for maximum efficiency. And everything's sort of made for maximum efficiency. And one of the biggest ways to get maximum efficiency is to continually maintain it, to change the oil, to keep it lubed, to keep it greased. And that sense of doing all that sort of stuff is really important here. Now, the sage, I've got written here, sage Angiras. And that sounds about right, Sage Angiras. But I noticed while I was doing my research, all kinds of different sages were coming up for Dhanishta. And so maybe we'll have to have a discussion and try to figure out which sage actually belongs with Dhanishta. And so we'll do it this way. So they're essentially kind of servants or public servants. But the thing is with Dhanishta, it's like there has to be some kind of stamp of approval. And that's the other thing that was coming up, these sort of stamps. Cookie cutters, right? Just cutting everything the same, cutting it all out, these sort of stamping things out. It's like as I'm doing Dhanishta, and when you think about Dhanishta, you know, Pink Floyd's song "Money," and it starts off, and you can sort of hear this boom, boom, and the cash register snoping, and the industrial sounds of things being stamped and pressed together. So all of that, and the cash register down too, I think is very much a Dhanishta. Cha-ching! There's anyways, we'll get to that. So it is that sort of dual movement going here, cha-ching kind of idea, a zigzag almost in a sense. So they're motivated by dharma, and really their main purpose or the meaning that they get out of life is really from efficiency, and that approval from the majority are really where they're going. It's a movable nakshatra. We talked about the reverberation. It's kind of it's being held down and almost pushed forward in a sense. Elon Musk came up in here as well, and I think it partially relates to this hyperloop tube that he wants to make. And well, it's kind of interesting. So another part of Dhanishta that came up is it sort of keeps things from touching, keeps things from getting too close in a sense. And there's that sense of separation because that's what lubrication does. When you lubricate all the gears and everything's got that oil on it, the point of the oil is actually to put a thin film between the gears of the metal or whatever, so the metal doesn't actually touch. Is kind of the point of that. And so it's trying to keep this sort of sense of separation. It's same, but different kind of idea. And it's funny if we think about like, because the Saturn just sort of transited through all these, all through the COVID stuff, right? And so we see that sense of separation, those senses of containment, right? All of that sort of has been going on in the last 3 or 4 years. That way. So there's this empty of the barrel. It's very volatile sort of thing. All those machine movements, whatever I miss, we'll get back to it. It's tamasic, and I think that's sort of like Dhanishta's that like the death of the inner child. Um, and it's very inert. It's like sand, coal, oil, these things that just fall to the bottom, like that. So it's a rakshas, and so it's a little bit demonic. It's a little bit hedonistic, and the way it goes about things. But it's definitely not a deva, right? Everything's just kind of numbers in a sense to Dhanishta. Um, and so there's none of that closeness or caring or any of that. Not a whole lot of soul. First Pita, uh, this is the first really fiery thing we get. Yeah, because servants are usually more Saturnius. I guess it's movable and changeable. Uh, the movable and changeableness is really quite important here, because it is moving. It's like you're moving those loads, or you're putting them together so you can move them, or you're putting it together so you can change. You're trying. Oh, that's the other thing that comes with the drum. What makes the sound of the drum when you strike it? And so there is almost like I really saw that these are like slaves, and so they're being struck forward in a sense, right? Beat into line in a sense. It's like if I go out wearing like Bubba in some shopping mall in Canada, um, eventually like society is going to force that change on me because there's going to be consequences. And so anything to do with Saturn. So all through Capricorn and Aquarius, there's going to be some kind of consequences. So we get that heat going on there. And it's also like we think of that heat when you're struck, it brings some inflammation as well. And so there's being that moved forward. So, but the thing is, they're still upward facing. And so they're looking to sort of climb the corporate ladder they're looking to get ahead. They're looking to move forward. All that sort of stuff comes into it. Very active. Vishnu maintaining. Oh, we talked about that. I think I've got that twice. Space element is very significant here. And just that sense of space. And like I said, space and time are commodities here. They're worth something. Whatever, all those things that seem quite insignificant find some kind of value in Dhanishta, especially when you put a lot of it together. Now the oil press is the place, I guess, where you find these Dhanishtas, and so there's high pressure used to expel the oil, and they are expellers, and so it's that idea of even like trying to drain all the juice out of a person. It's kind of like it's like the industrial era. We're using everybody for maximum efficiency, and you're doing everything you can to sort of drain the soul out of them. Right? You're trying to extract that juice. And then once you've drained the soul out of them, well, then you've got your big army of people who are sort of acting in sync, in a sense. There's that synchronicity or that, that symphony, right? And so, but first you have to sort of break the spirit. And so the spirit of these people is broken to a certain degree. I didn't write much about it, but coconut is the plant for this. And again, coconut, it's one of these magical plants. You can actually do your blood transfusion using coconut milk. And so it really is. It's very much, we're talking the lifebloods of 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 the plant, of the body, of the earth. And so you get these guys, a lot of oil extraction and all that. That's the lifeblood of the earth. There must be with oil extraction our own lifeblood, so it must connect somehow with our own blood. It certainly relates with, like, if we think of in the body, I didn't write a lot about this below yet, but I think of the body, kind of all the hollow cavities of the body. And I think that would include like things like the pathways of the veins and the arteries. And now here's something that's bugging the hell out of me about Dhanishta. And maybe you guys can help me. So I kept getting this sort of image in Dhanishta of, like, you've got your main hub, say with electricity, right? You're moving power. And so you've got your power station. And from that power station, you've got these massive transmission lines that go out. Maybe they go to all 4 or 5 different cities, these big transmission lines. And from those big transmission lines, you get smaller transmission lines that sort of go into the neighborhoods then. And from those, you get like smaller transmission lines that go to the boroughs, and the little tiny ones that go to the house, and then the really tiny ones that go to your light bulb. And so it's this, I kept getting that sort of image with Dhanishta, and I'm not sure if it's right. I'm not sure. I got to look further ahead and see if these things are relating to Dhanishta, or sorry, to Shravan or some of the other ones. Or Mike, just stop talking for a minute. Satabishak. um, having troubles finding my words. But Satabishak, of course, it's famous for covering as well, but it's not containing quite the way Dhanishta is. In Satabishak, it's just a cover, and it's not sort of fully contained. All the air can still move through there. It's kind of like, I got a kind of a sense that the earlier parts of Dhanishta really more focused on moving liquids, whereas the latter half of Dhanishta then came into moving dry goods, but still, I think to a sense, things that have to, either dry goods that have to stay dry, um, but the air can still get to them in the load sort of idea. That air is still sort of moving through, but it's contained. Whereas in the first half of Dhanishta, I think it's fully, we're talking fully sealed sort of containers, something that can hold water. And then when we get to Satabishak, I think what's being contained is, or sorry, things are just being covered. They're not being fully contained, kind of covered over. But then there's a sense of the cover sort of having holes in it. And so it's not really there to block any water or anything. It's just kind of covering, giving it shade, keeping it hidden, I guess is what you get. And so that's not the Bishak. Now we're back. We'll come back to the containment. Um, and that also is a coconut's interesting because it has so much hollow inside as well. Um, and there's the husk. This is the other thing that came because a lot of well, at least the stretching of the skins comes into here. And so there is that sense of skin. And again, I got a little confused. Dhanishta, Satabishak, there's a bit of both in the covering there, but I get the sense that Dhanishta is like just the empty husk of who you are. It's just your container. That's all. Then you have to look inside for the soul. So this is that sense of, like, you're just a body, you're just an object. Um, and I don't know if we all know, but at some time we must have had jobs, or we've met people that just treated us like a number, like an object, like we're just one like all the others, and there's none of that. So that really comes into here as well. Uh, let's skip by that. So the symphony, an extended musical composition, usually for orchestras. So all these distinct sections and movements and all of that kind of thing. It usually has a very unique structure, the way they give it to them. Now, it's like when we talk about the numbers, a symphony is usually 30 to 100 people. And so I think this is sort of getting into Aquarius. We get into those bigger numbers, at least 30, say. Um, Although it's hard to say that because we're dealing with at least 7 or 8, maybe because Dhanishta numbers. But we're certainly getting into those bigger crowds. Um, there's an agreement and or concord of sound sort of thing. It's sometimes referred to consonance and dissonance. Uh, yeah, that's the other thing. There was this sense of like the damanu, the drum was like something that could make more than one sound at once. Was a big part of this. And so you get like the bells, drums and bells, I think become very important in Dhanishta as well. The bell is like the dinner bell, right? It often marks the time, right? You hear the church bell, it's time to go to church. And so the bells are offering that sort of, and there's this curvature, again, that hourglass figure that bells kind of have. We'll get into more of this, the bell shape ahead. Um, yeah, everything that sense of things sounding together instead of geometric patterns along symmetrical lines, that also comes in. A lot of geometry, a lot of symmetry. Now I listed off the 8 Vasus, Apasu's water, this kind of flow. I wrote a little bit about them there. Um, but Apus is that wateriness, the flow. I got a better, my list up here, I think, is better if I'm just going through them quick. So it's that sense of following the path of least resistance with the water. You got a lot of watery ones here because we got Apus and we have Dada, which is different streams, and we have Soma, who's kind of moony and watery also. We got a lot of watery sort of things here. But you got that Polaris, which is the main hub, and then you got all these different pathways and streams. Um, Apus always looking for the path of least resistance. Gets very fixed once it gets that path. Um, Anila is the wind, that's ability to change into very adaptable and can sort of adapt at the last minute to changing situations. You got Soma, which is this elixir. It's a kind of lubrication in a way. Soma, it helps us, it inspires us. And so the Soma drink or a few drinks of beer or whatever, a few shots of ganja or something like that, that sense of Soma inebriation is also a sense of inspiration. And so that comes in, or a sense of lubrication. It gets things moving. And that's really a big part of Dhanishta. They get the Anila as the fire. And as I said, I think it has a lot to do with the fuels for fire. What fuels us? And so, well, for humans, that's food that fuels us. For our fires, it's different oils or maybe even the trees sort of idea that fuel us. Um, I'm just jumping ahead before I jump ahead. Um, think first, then speak, Mike. Um, So, and it's the most famous is the Swift. Oh, I've already done all that. Here we go back down. Coconuts. So I listed off also the 8 Bhairavas. Bhairava came up a lot in this. Over and over and over, Bhairava kept coming up. That Supreme Bhairava, the guardian, the Kshatra, he's the guardian of the field, in a sense, the guardian of Varanasi as well. He rules over all the other Bhairavas. I shoot the leader of the ghosts and the ghouls, Lord Bhairava, who wears the red flame in his matted hair, who wears the moon, who shines in red color, who holds the drum, the spear, the skull, the rope, the mace in his hand. He who is nude, who rides on a dog, who has 3 eyes, who is always happy and exuberant, and the guard of the temple. And so we talked about like there is some that guarding of it's like the guarding of the marketplace in a sense is what's going on here. You can't get your things to marketplace until they're approved. So things have to be approved in Dhanishta. They've got to get that stamp of approval, especially before they can move forward. You get a lot of, especially as we get into the Aquarius side, you get things like government grants and things like this, but it's different than in in Leo. You're getting people are investing and they're taking a big risk. You're maybe the investments made there are towards something that's not proven. And so there's a big risk there. But once it sort of goes through whatever your bright idea say was in Leo, by the time it gets to Shravan and then to um Dhanishta, then it's been approved. It's like government approved. And now it can go forward. And so then you can start to get like government grants and things like that because, well, the government doesn't want to take a risk. And there's that a little bit less sense of risk here. Still some, but much less. It's like it's been tested already. Don't really have to worry about it too much anymore. You can just let it go. Um, and so we get all that. We talked about this being hell, a place of the ghosts and goblins. It's like you go into those mass marketplaces, and God, everybody's just so the same. It's like walking into a hell. Especially if you're a really unique sort of person. Um, and so the wearing the red, wearing the moon, we're seeing even some of the Vasus are being mentioned here, the drum, the spear of the skull, the rope, the mace. The rope is interesting too because the tie downs. The mace as well because they use it to strike it forward or to spear, sort of prodding people forward. Um, the nude, I think, just talks about the sense of the skin, the coverings that come involved in here. Dhanishta, I think, is more the skin as a covering. And then we get into Sata Bishak, because Sata Bishak has a lot to do with the skin as well. But I think it relates more with the pores of the skin and a different part of the skin, or maybe a different nature or purpose of the skin in Sata Bishak. But for now, it's anyways, it's that covering. It's to contain everything. So I won't go through each of these Bhairavas, but there's a little thing there for each, a little saying for each Bhairava. It's a very lovely sort of thing to do. Then we get Bhishma. Yeah, this was another really serious test. Bhishma was born from Ganga, who was, how does this start? So you had the eight Vasus, and they were gods, and they're all having fun and enjoying some frolicking in the forest. One of them got a bright idea to steal Kamadhenu, the wish-fulfilling cow. Um, and then he can't remember. He talked his wife into. I got the whole story written here. And he talked his wife into helping him and stuff. But anyways, they got caught because you can't steal from a rishi. The rishi always knows. And so all eight Vasus got punished for this. They got, and their punishment was to be born as humans. And in a sense, that was, I think, the reason that was such a bad sentence is because it's like, well, it's like a god, someone, it's like a Leo being sentenced to hell to have to go and just be a normal, ordinary person. And so that is a kind of hell. And so they got sent down to become humans. But they made a deal with Ganga first. They were going to be born from Ganga. And they made a deal with her, and she said, okay, no problem. You'll be born here, but I'll kill all of you, except only one will have to live. Um, and again, I think that's that sort of like that sense of Durava, the pole star. Um, again, that one that is more significant than the others somehow in a way. Everybody else is sort of revolving around that one. Anyway, so you get that sort of sense. And so Ganga then, anyway, she got married to a king, and she told the king, like, okay, I'm gonna have your babies, but and we can be married, but you can't ask me any questions. And that really is that sort of like, that's that Leo person going, I'm gonna do whatever I want to do, and no questions. You just can't ask me anything. And so she did, and so she killed 7 of the Vasus. And she was going to keep the 8th one alive, but then the king got all sort of excited and got ahead of himself and jumped in there and started asking questions and saying, no, you can't kill my boy like you did all the others and blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, I wasn't going to. Here, have your boy. but I'm leaving you because you questioned me. Um, and so that kind of thing comes up. Now, there's a definite there's two real shapes that seem to pop up a lot in Dhanishta. And one is the cylinder, and one was the hourglass. And so the cylinder is interesting. I think Dhanishta has to do with shape and form generally, because that's part of the reasons I think Mars does so well here, because that's the field of Mars. Mars deals with shape and form. He's able to coordinate to get around any of the obstacles in a sense, overcome all of the obstacles that can happen, especially in the physical plane. And so that's really what there's that big sense of that there. But then we talked about the cylinder form, we talked about tunnels, capsules. I think tablets have things to do with this. Like I think ivermectin was all the rage when Saturn was transiting through here then. Um yeah, there's a cylinder is interesting. There's a because it's circles and squares. It's kind of apples and oranges in a sense. And you get that it's time and space. It's Shiva and Shakti. There's a lot of duality, that kind of duality in Dhanishta, but coordinated. Might be different, but we're coordinating them. Sort of idea. So you got that barrels, storage drums, empty vessels, drums, containers, sensors and signals. That's another thing that drums get. They're very sensitive. The Chinese used to bury them under the ground, or I can't remember exactly. I had to look that up, but they used to bury them somehow so that they would, if there was any vibration in the ground, any marching armies coming their way, it would travel through the ground and reverberate on their drums. And so also that sort of sensors, I get a sense like satellite dishes, where also we see that sort of shape of the Damaru. An interesting thing about Damaru as well, jumps us back up to my novel a little bit. Um, just excuse me for a sec. I got a drink. Sorry. So a big part of this is that Brahava, and the interesting thing, Vajrayana, I think becomes especially important here. Maybe even more so than the Hindu tantras to a certain degree. Um, so if you look in the, especially in Vajrayana and the Buddhist cultures, they're really brutal. Um, and you see all kinds of implements using human bones, you could say. And so that was another thing. Those damarus, they were sometimes made from our skull caps. That kind of top of the skull, they cut it off, they would seal them together and make a damaru out of that. And I'm yet to see a bubba with a skull cap damaru, and I've seen a lot, but I haven't seen that one yet. But that's that sort of like the other thing about the damaru is you walk while you're playing it. Same as the marching band. I think there's that sort of like playing the music and walking. There's always doing at least two things at once. Again, why Mars is exalted here, because it really pushes all of that into action. And so doing many things at once, very coordinated, very quick. Um, all of that sort of stuff. Now, the other thing is with Mars here, we talked about the sense of fuel and what these barrels are sort of carrying. And so I think when Mars is there, it's carrying the fuels for fire. And so like things like the oils and things that are really expensive. And so it does very well that way. Yeah. So it's not an average at all, like we'd see in Shravan terms, and covering to hold it all tarps and coverings to hold it down. The same way the skin of a drum is held down by so many ropes. That crisscrossing of the ropes as well. The sign for Aquarius is the two parallel zigzagging line, which must look like crisscrossing straps, which are used to apply equal pressure across the whole load or across the whole drum. The sense of equality but equal force being applied downward. This is why Sun and Mars do well in these nakshatras, because they struggle so hard against the downward force in order to rise. So there's that as well. Like you're always holding, because Sun and Mars are upward moving energies, whereas Dhanishta is pushing them down, but they're struggling. They're still moving upward. And so they become very, very strong because they struggle against the stream, sort of thing. Struggle, the Sun would be more struggle to I don't know, express itself, its true self. So we talked about the moisture, keeping rain and liquids in or keeping rain out. Of course, more related to minerals, solids, speculative goods. Saw some people that are working with like housewares and things like that. That's all being moved as dry goods. Empty vessels make the most sound. That was the other thing here. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. The empty vessels makes the most sound. There's an emptiness. These people are kind of empty, and they might make a lot of noise. It's like, actually, that's the other thing here. Democracy is in Dhanishta. It used to be when democracy started, it wasn't like people weren't putting their votes in a little box. It was whoever made the most noise won. So we get up there, we make a debate. Your guys scream for you, my guys scream for me. Whoever can shout the other one down wins. And that's kind of Dhanishta's. There's no real substance in a Dhanishta, but they're really good at making noise. They're really good at being heard. And so they get the grease, they get the money. Even with the government, the dolphin is one of the signs here. Dolphin is a few things, but dolphin jumps through all the hoops. And Dhanishta is really a hoop jumper. And so they're able to jump through all the hoops to get that approval, to get that mark of you can move forward. So there's a lot of that going on here. So yeah, there's the squeaky, there's our democracy. Okay, from another perspective, we could think of that Taoist sense of, I'll get to you in a moment, and we get to that Taoist sense of an empty vessel. And so to become empty, that spiritual sense of emptiness, for peace and harmony and all that sort of thing also comes in here. So there can also be a real peace to this nakshatra. But it's that piece of like, what could you say? Ignorance is bliss, maybe. Because when you're full inside, when you're not just you don't get any peace. Because when you're full, you've got to do something with that fullness. It's coming up and up. And so they can sit nicely in peace. The percussion drums. I looked up this word percussion. Talks about a blow, an internal injury, a beating. A beat is a measure of time. There's a medical diagnosis refers to striking and tapping on the body to determine the health of the organs. The pre means to forward, to be first. Percussion is actually comes from quash, meaning to suppress, to overcome, to nullify, to empty, to put down, to subdue. And so we talked about like subduing the masses and all of that, quashing the revolt sort of thing. Also means to break, to crush, to weaken. There's a repercussion. There's a reverberation. This echo, it comes back at you again. Very karmic as well that way. That sort of idea of give and take, or action and reaction. There's always that reaction in Dhanishta. We can also, I just started looking into this because I don't know anything about music, but they use these sort of compressors and expanders to increase the dynamic range. This isn't necessarily a volume increase. It's not more. It's expanded. The sound gets out to more places in a sense, right? It's Yeah, you're just able to tell everyone kind of thing. Rather than just making it louder, it's kind of like I tell you, you tell them, they tell the next. It's like a little game of telephone in a way. And so the very good for getting the message out there, though. We talked about the stretching the skin used for food. Oh, that's the other thing. The oils in the skin and the especially the animal fats as well. They were often used as sealants. Very early sealants for things. Um, and I think that's part of the reason they would get used as the skins of a drum, because that bit of animal fat that's in the skin, it's going to seal it tight so that there's no air or no water or nothing's escaping from that. It's like a cage. It's like, oh, what's that? I think it was a Nirvana song, "Caught in a Cage," something, something, something. But this is that cage that people get caught in. Um, Shiva's drum, the Damaru, masculine, feminine, good and evil. It's always again that two-sided thing. The sound, it compared to a garland of Sanskrit letters. These are the spiritual sounds that make the universe go. Shiva's Tandava, Nataraja Shiva, right? The one who's dancing, creating, maintaining, destroying the universe through his cosmic dance. Um, this also brings in, when you start to look into that shape of the Nataraja, it brings into play a lot of the kind of symmetry, symmetrical, you say. Anyways, just nice symmetry designs and geometric designs and shapes and things like that. Um, the hourglass, symbol of a very narrow present being between the past and the future. Uh, but they're also trying to, in the hourglass, that middle part, you can stretch it out to a certain sense. And so that's that idea of trying to stretch out the time. And we can do that in the present by just making better use of our time. Um, yeah, it's just a fleeting of time. The hourglass etched into the tombstone, the time being fleeting, blah, 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 blah. The inner clock. There's so much in Capricorn and Aquarius that really is hell. We're as far away from the central spirits of ourselves as we can. Everything here is the same, but different, like grains of sand. They all may be different and unique in their own way, but they don't really have anything to do. There's a sense of stretching time with efficiency. Everything is on a timer here. But again, it's as if this happens in two different ways. The natural flow of the seasons is replaced here, and that's very important. The natural flow of the seasons is replaced for the efficiency of the business calendar, coordinated movement of the goods and services. And so it doesn't matter what season it is, or none of that sort of matters. It matters when, when that product is going to arrive here, when can it get here, when can we make it happen? Is sort of like, that's really what Dhanishtas are concerned about. They don't care about anything else. Make it happen. Get her done. Right? These are really Dhanishta sort of ideas. For Dhanishta folk, there's no difference between the hour of Brahma when we revise to do our meditation, the hour of dinner in the evening. An hour is an hour is an hour is an hour. This seems to be important to the efficiency of the whole system being used to order society and resources. Time itself is either saved or spent. Maximum efficiency is applied to space as well, like Tetris, like sands in an hourglass. The bulbous shape of the bulbous shape of the bell and the hourglass and all of that seem to have some importance here as well. Light bulbs, glass, glass making, glass blowing. And these are sort of container filling up with empty space. It's like the flute or the reed. It's this empty space, but it's the movement through it that sort of makes the sound. Um, Here's another one that's really bothering the Indian niche stuff. It's the screw shape. This seemed to come up a lot. There's these augers, and augers are often, they're sort of used to, well, you can use them to move water and move anything, actually. Move dirt, drill holes sort of idea. But the screw shape, and I think it's sort of related with this idea of like tightening the screws, in a sense. 'Cause, 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 the sense of the revolving staircase being is very efficient use of space as your revolving staircase. Um, Screws are also used to fasten and tie things down as well, but they also progressively tighten. Tension type screws. There is a lot of tension here. I get a sense that compressors have some importance here as well, like air compressors, both compressing the air and using to fill other things up. Kind of, it's like when you fill up a tire that's deflated, it expands that space, right? It opens it all up. And so there's that sense here. Oh, we can't forget how much lusted over the hourglass figure. Large breasts, large hips, narrow waist. Very contained. You'll see these women now, right? They're wearing like Lululemon yoga pants. These are a great example of Dhanishta, because what they do is they push things in different directions to shape them in a way, right? And so it's all about this tension. It lifts the ass, pushes the boobs up, tightens the tummy, does all these sort of things. And so that is really, I think Dhanishta's, especially in women, I think that really hourglass shape is going to be more likely in them. A little bit bigger women, at least the bigger hips and bigger breasts, sort of comes in. As they get older, of course, these women do put on weight. So that's, oh yeah, they look like baby making machines. And I think that's a big, again, it's that sense of machine, right? The women with the big breasts and the big hips, you can just keep filling her up again and again and again in a sense, right? You can just keep making more babies. She looks like the kind of woman you can just turn into that baby making machine. And so they get all of that here. So there's a lot of competition in here as well. Many saints say that when we finally begin to express, oh yeah, I talked about that being pulled down. In many ways, the realm of Dhanishta is dealing with cheap and best. If you want to offer a better product, price will go up. If you want to offer, God, Myra, I just hammer this stuff out and I don't look back. But anyways, it can either be cheap or it can be good. And that's sort of what Dhanishta, it's like one goes up, the other goes down in a sense. And what ultimately Dhanishta wants to do is keep everything level. And so there is always this sort of, but there's always movement. It's Mars rule, so it's always being dynamic. So something always kind of has to be done to set that. So the dolphin, then. This is from Srimad Bhagavad Gita. This great machine, consisting of stars and planets, resembles the swarm of a dolphin in the water. It's sometimes considered an incarnation of Krishna, Vasudeva. Great yogis meditate on Vasudeva in the form because it is actually visible. So the machine is almost like the visible, as they say, the visible form of God. And I think that, again, it's like, well, that spirit that you have inside of you, that Leo nature, that fire you have burning inside, nobody can see that. They can see your acts. They can see what you've done. They can see what you've made, sort of idea. They can see the machine. And so they can see your body. And so what you have on the outside is often a reflection of what you have on the inside. And so the dolphin is that sort of like the outer form, what can be seen of what the good acts that you have inside, what good or bad you have inside is seen through the form. So dolphins are unique creatures, very intelligent, but it's kind of a childlike nature of playfulness and understanding. They can be quite selfish as well, which I think is what sort of dulls some of their intelligence, because intelligence is Leo. And so this is the opposite, sort of the container for that intelligence. Like intelligent design in a sense, right? So you've got that intelligence. What are you using for? How is it being used? A a lot of navigation type stuff comes through, elocution, sonar type things. The whistle, click, release bursts of pulses of sound in an advanced way that we still don't understand, but works in such precision and group cohesion that it seems almost telepathic and highly intuitive. So you might get some telepathy and that ability to sort of spontaneously move the group in a sense. Move, everybody moves as one sort of idea. So, but they are fearless in the face of predators and will sacrifice themselves to protect. So then we get the stories of the oil press, King Vikramaditya, Shani and the oil press. So Vikramaditya was a great king, and I can't remember what his crime was. Oh no, it was no crime. He just got lost in the forest. And anyways, he got lost in the forest. He lost all his limbs. He ended up becoming an oil press. Now, I looked more into King Vikramaditya. Vikram means victory. Aditya means sun, I guess. So the victorious sun, in a sense, is what you get here. Sounds a lot like Jesus in a sense. Oh well, there's. I'll let you read this. I added this. I almost want to send you this thing now because I've added so much to it. But there's all kinds of stories about Vikramaditya. Yeah, a lot of enmity towards other castes. He has the story of the umbrella with 5 sticks, contains the story of magic and witchcraft. So there is some of that magic. Collection of 32 folk tales on him. Shown 32 statues who are actually upset as atmospheric female spirits, the clouds and the waters, where they turn to stone by a curse. Again, being turned to stone in a sense is another sense here. Medusa did that as well, turned people to stones. Anyways, I'll let you read that. Here's the story of Shani himself with the oil press. At the end, he just had to, he had to, where is it? Anyways, kind of, he finds someone who has faith in him and wants to marry him. Doesn't matter who he is, wants to marry him anyway. And that's sort of a sense. So she married this handicapped person. That night on the nuptial bed, the king dreamed saw Shani come for his suffering. So Shani came along. The king then narrated the story to his bride, son, and blessed the couple so that they would lead a happy life. All his limbs were restored. Oh, the procession is, I think, as well. Anyways, that wasn't a great story. The sesame oil for Lord Shani. When you go online, you see a lot of either sesame oil or mustard oil for Lord Shani. Uh, I think sesame oil is it's the more common oil to burn or to add the sesame oil to Lord Shani. And again, it's like they add these oils to Shani, and every time you add the oil, it adds another little film to that Saturn. And what happens is when you come back to that Saturn after they've been doing that, see this a lot in Nepal especially. You come back after so many years of doing, you can't. There's no statue there. It's just a lump of oil, and that's sort of again that very slowly trying to bring people down so that they're not distinguished in any way, that the same as everything else. And so that sort of that idea comes around. Yeah, the continuous build up. In the Bible, we get in Kings, the widow with the olive oil. Wife of a man from a company, the prophet cries out, Elisha, your servant, his husband is dead. You know that he revered the Lord, but now his creditor is coming to take his 2 boys and his slaves. Elijah replied to her, how can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in the house? So anyway, so we'll just skip to the end of this. Elijah said, go around and ask your neighbors for empty jars. Don't just ask for a few. Go inside and shut the door and take all the jars you can. Pour oil into all the jars. Each filled, put one aside. She left him and shut the door behind her. They brought the jars. She kept pouring. just kept filling jars. And when there were none left, she was able to pay her debts. So sort of that having faith in the God, or having, I think there's almost a sense here of like, if everybody puts a penny in the jar, then you become a millionaire, right? But otherwise, it's just one penny sort of idea. And so, but if everybody does it, you can become very, very rich. And so we get the biblical stories. I started looking into the oils as well. I'm not sure if there's anything there or not, but I think when we start looking at temperatures and how they're used, I think something's going to come out of that. Whale oil, I think, is especially significant here. I'm not sure if this is just edible oils in Dhanishta. Get the lubricating oils for moisturizing, lubricating, essential type oils. Yeah, that plant fat or that animal fat used for lubrication. They lubricate things for move, lube things for maximum efficiency. Um, yeah, I just went into a little bit of the history of oils. Oh, this is interesting. Even when you're making the like olive oils, for example, or sesame oils. Sesame oils was some of the first oils, plant-based oils they started to make, by the way. Uh, but anyways, there's a byproduct, a cake gets left over. Um, yeah, that's sort of leftover, and it's like what's being used out of these things here is almost nothing, right? They're just squeezing out that little bit of oil, and actually, so everything else is useless in a way. It's like, do this job for me, and if you can't do this job, you're useless. You're a garbage person, in a sense. So there's that comes out as well. Um, Lamp oils used for illumination. It's interesting. It's like these oils are used for so many things that we don't even think about. Um, but here we get the dia and very for illumination. This is very what can you say? The dia is very, very commonly used in India, all over the place. They like the diyas to help push Saturn back to a certain degree. Um, oh, the bell curve. I remember that. So, and that is, it's like the bell curve, everyone falls within a certain deviation, a standard deviation. And you can still be average as long as you stay within that standard deviation. But in the bell curve, it's when you get out to the extremes that you really, there's no more movement left. Anyway, but as long as you sort of stay in the middle ground, you can what could you say? You can express yourself. You can express your authenticity as long as you stay within the certain parameters of Dhanishta. And so again, there's the bell curve, um, distribution channels. This is for business or for marketing. And they're often, you're seeing this 8 channels, 8 methods of distribution. And I think that sense of distribution really becomes important here. You can read those on your own. Um, yeah, just all the levels of selection and filtering things out. I talked about here how they get, it's like just a tomato, for example. First, the farmer selects all the best, then the warehouser selects the best, and then, everybody is selecting the best until after it goes through 7 or 8 people and it comes to you. And then you're looking at the 3 tomatoes in your fridge. Which one am I going to use today? So there's always a selection process going on here. Speech, 8 parts to speech. Any coincidence? Nouns, pronouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs. It's got to move. It's got to be described. It's got to be, there's just so many parts that have to come together to make a sentence. And so that's also Dhanishta. It's just bringing everything together to make it useful. And there's also that idea of like, it's not quite exactly true with language, but any one of these things on their own is kind of useless. But when you put them all together, you almost get this kind of magic comes out of it. It's it becomes more than the sum of its parts here as well, in a sort of sense. So all the hollow cavities of the bodies, the connective tissues. If we think of the tie downs, we're seeing all those connected, the ligaments and tendons and those sort of things that are connecting. Of course, the skin is going to be involved here as well. The covering, the sacs, the pericardium around the heart. What other all the hollow tubes used for moving, and so all the intestinal organs, the stomach, and all of that sort of stuff. Like I say, I think also the blood vessels and the vessels for things are also here. No, I look down, so we'll see what I missed. Dhanishta is much like Shravan in the uniformity and conformity. The difference is that Dhanishta is a performance pressure. So there's always some pressure to perform here. What are we, a little over an hour? Yeah, I talked about this being one of the great flaws of democracy because it's just who is the loudest. And these days we have like Twitter and all these things. It's like, I laugh. Is it Twitter? Oh, yeah, it's named X now. But anyways, Twitter is like, it's one of those things when there's a whole lot of noise made on Twitter, all of a sudden it's a thing in this world. And it's like for people who don't follow Twitter or aren't on Twitter, it means nothing to us. It's like, what are you? It's just like a bunch of noise on Twitter. Just define the direction of our government, of our society, right? And it's ridiculous, but that's Dhanishta. Whoever's making the most noise makes the rules. And so it's a big flaw in democracy, actually. So it is that majority rule, though. Shravan, everything's lined up nicely. It's reduced to its lowest common denominator. But Dhanishta, it sets that in action. It sets that in motion. Again, instead of it just sort of stamps like cookie cutter. It makes it automates the process of killing your soul. So there's the sound of the cash register. Again, that stamp of approval we talked about here. Majority approval in a mundane way. First, we have to become average and deaden our souls before we can advance in the system. We can say that wherever our great theories of life are, have to be applied and replicated multiple times. It's that sort of science that wants to replicate things multiple times as well. The science started back in Mula with observation, started back in Sun with the bright idea, but then it gets to Mula and it's observation. From observation, we get the hypothesis, and we move through the theoretical side. Those theories start to get applied and tested in the real world in Capricorn. Can they pass the muster? There's a sense muster is a muster point. It's a point where everybody gathers together in a sense. Usually when there's an emergency, if you go on a job site, especially these big corporate job sites, one of the first things you actually see when you get to the job site is usually a big sign that says muster point. And if you don't know what that is, it means nothing. You just go on a job site. But the muster point, when there's an emergency on the job site, everybody has to gather at the muster point. So anyways, there's that. Pass the test, get the approval to move forward. And that's the thing, you move to the muster point until you get some kind of approval that you can leave or that you can do anything. But especially when it's an emergency, it becomes almost a lockdown time. And so you cannot leave that muster point until you've been accounted for, in a sense, right? It's like a building's on fire and they want to count for everyone. So you got to follow the rules, follow the laws, do what you're said, kind of just follow that stream of where everybody's leaving the building that's on fire. So that whole process of governments through Capricorn, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches here. I get a sense we expect the judiciary to be on the other side. Um, but actually, it's like when you get to court is where the law gets tested. They make a new law, they apply it, they tell everybody, and then that law starts to get tested. And the more it gets tested and proves itself, it becomes a very good precedent that they can use. But there's still a testing being going on here. And so you just saw like something like Roe versus Wade in the US, the abortion law. I don't know much about it, but it just got overturned. It kept getting tested until it found its breaking point. And so there is that sort of thing going on here. Votes of confidence. I talked about the bad apple ruining a whole bunch. When that happens, you don't see it just with apples, you see it with a lot of things. If it's too overripe, it speeds up the ripening process of everything else. So everything ends up going bad really, really quick. Being judged by society, I talked about all that. Tie downs, excellent dancers, multiple pistons, add ups, startups, peas in a pod, all that kind of thing. A repeating symmetry, Star of Symphony that gives that kind of love for music, or that it's really that beat that keeps everything in line in a sense. Mentioned the Oracle of Delphi here. Not sure. Um, yeah, cattle mazes, anything where everything was kind of being put into a streamline. Streamline's probably a very good word for Dhanishta. Um, yeah, there is more of it's the merit that is rewarded though. You have to actually be able to do the job, you could say in Dhanishta. Yeah, the Capricorn side might be more jumping with through hoops, where the Aquarius side more focused on the networking side of things. Very impulsive. I have a note here that it's might just be the middle nakshatra. Does it relate with the 8 Vaidavas? Um, yeah, there's a lot of crossing boundaries here as well. The grammar and the syllables of the Damaru, the eardrum as well, the ability to, yeah, within the ear, there's the drum in the ear as well. So Shravan is the ear, and Dhanishta is like the drum in the ear. So there's a lot of Shravan and Nisha. I find they're working together a lot, like the Purva and the Nuttara Bhadrapadas are really working together quite a bit here. Um, gonna delete that whole thing. But there is a sense these are breadwinner kind of people. They're gonna go out with the group and do what the group does to survive. They're not very creative on that, but they'll do it. They'll get it done. Um, oh, there is also that sort of celibacy that comes in here with Mars and Dhanishta. And I think really what that is there's like it's that sense of efficiency, no wasted energy. Maybe it's like that idea like sex is for making babies. If you're not going to make a baby, if you're not going to get the job done, well, what's the point of doing the work? I think is how Denise sort of see things. And so they are able to, and they're really able to control their desires quite a bit. And the men can attract women, but not have sex with them. This is another thing that makes women really mad. Um, there's kind of this meme out there, like these days they talk about the sort of like, I don't know what they call it, the incel or the cis or whatever. Anyways, the men who get mad by women turning them down. Um, in my experience, men seem to handle rejection a lot better than women. Women don't handle rejection at all. Men are not supposed to reject women. Um, right. And so I've been baking a lot, and I thought I just something triggered a smell hit my nose. Anyways, So there is that sense. So these men, again, especially with the Mars, if they're maintaining a celibacy, they're going to be rejecting women. Women hate that. Just telling you, Emmett. I don't know if your Mars is there or not, but yeah. And so that's the other thing with the niches. I think generally speaking, they tend to sort of make a lot of enemies as well. Um, and maybe they're their own enemy is maybe the best way to put this, because they're not really connected to that deep inner sense of self, right? They're even treating themselves a bit like a husk, like a body. Um, and that's Mars is going for the celibacy. When we get to the moon there, it's much more of you're just a body, you're just a number, you're just a husk. And so to be used like a body. Um, so very promiscuous. Some of these theories I think I've got to kind of work on. Oh, there's the Ganga, the King stuff. Oh, the 8 directions. So space, I already talked about space being important here, but it's this space and time. They're trying to stretch it. They're trying to make more of with what we have, making the most out of what we have, I guess. Or trying to make more out of a limited situation. These kind of things sort of come up with Dhanishta. Um, so they're stretching the fabrics of time, stretching space in a sense. A lot of athletes, those scientists again, rigorous testing. Anybody who wants to test people, really. Um, that's another why I think especially women hate the men with Dhanishta, but it says nothing about the men hating the women, because it's a women's job to sort of test us, right? And that's what men hate. We get into a relationship and it's like these women are testing us, but they're sort of testing us to see if we can pass the muster, right? Where man, it's not quite as important. You could say man, I think, is more likely to be polygamous, right? And so it's not so important which women he sleeps with, because okay, we'll just get 10 women pregnant, and I'm bound to get a good child out of that. But women has to be very, very selective, and so she has to test men, and so women don't like being tested, but women have to test men, and so there's so many things. It's like here today, the big thing today is that men have no support, and everything's about women, 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 and there's nothing really there for men. And my mom worked in the system for a long time, and she talks as like women's shelters. There's 20 of them in this town apparently. There's no men's shelters, and we complain about that a lot as men. We kind of go, oh well, there should be this, and men need more support, and men need this, and men need that. But there's another side of that where it's like, no, be a man. You make it on your own. And this really sucks about being a man, because we're sort of, there's that expectation. And as soon as you start to sort of complain about like, oh well, there's no shelters for men, it's like, well, grow up, be a man, go get a job, go to work, go do what you don't like it, take a job at McDonald's, right? Kind of idea. I mean, it's like, well, nobody wants to take a job at McDonald's, but as a last resort, it's like you have to sort of be that breadwinner in a sense. You're not, doesn't matter who you are, you're the man who's supposed to feed us. So go and feed us any way necessary. So that kind of comes in. I think that happens with women as well, anything necessary. So women often end up on their back, right? That's the quickest, easiest sort of job, the lowest denominator job a women can get. So, anyways, um, back problems. I think the back problems. I've got sciatica listed here, but I think this is more the curvature in the spine, right? It's that S curve, that hourglass sort of shape that we get in here, and so we get hourglass shaped problems in the back. Um, So again, this is crossing the line. I haven't talked about this much, but this is really crossing the line from public to private. public to private partnerships are sort of going on here. Um, Again, the government grant, like all those necessities. This is especially on the Capricorn side. All those necessities, public goods, all of that sort of stuff. That's maybe could be the job of the government, but anyways, they pass it on. So I think some monopolies tend to work here as well. It's like the government award a job. Um, yeah, it's as much who you know as what you know. And I think the Dhanishta really is both. It's who you know and what you know. Both of those. And they have to find some sort of balance between them. So we get to the names here. And so just so you guys know, I'm also planning after all of this is done, I after this Nakshatra project is done, I'm planning on picking it apart piece by piece. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to do like a class on Moon and Ashwini, another whole class on Sun and Ashwini, Mars and Ashwini. I'm going to make myself crazy. Um, so we're going to do that. And so that's kind of that Dhanishta, is breaking things down into smaller and smaller sort of packets of information for us to deal with. So here we go. We got the Ascendant and the Dhanishta. I don't know, Barack Obama. Yeah, you got some pretty good leadership people. Someone like Ken Kesey was always on the road, always that constant movement. Uh, James Joyce also traveled quite a bit. It's funny because these guys, especially James Joyce, very unique, very avant-garde, right? You wouldn't think there'd be much avant-garde in Dhanishta, but that's probably coming from other places because he was at the same time his personality and the personalities of a lot of these guys, not so much Barack Obama. Maybe it's an executive personality going on there, um, but they're kind of man of the people in a sense. Regardless of like James Joyce, he wrote this crazy literary masterpiece that only about 10 people in the whole world can understand. Um, but he's still just a normal sort of guy. Abraham Lincoln, Ramakrishna, Alan Shepard, aviation. We saw some aviation and stuff here too. I think in regards to the aviation, it's that transport, it's that empty vessel, that empty tube really is the airplane. I mentioned things like the tunnels, tubes, all of that sort of stuff. Get involved here. As usual, I'm just going to skip past the Ascendant and get into the Sun and Dhanishta. And these are the people that are really trying to distinguish themselves in the masses in a way. Look, the psychologist Alfred Adler was working with a lot of sort of individual psychology, but he had this sort of well, you can look it up, Alder in psychology. There's like a streamlined approach to teaching, and he really worked a lot with youth delinquency and teaching practice for lids. And so he made this streamlined approach in order to kind of make kids into individuals, right? And that's sort of it's the opposite, I guess, of what Dhanishta is doing. He's taking from that whole pile of rocks, and the sun is sort of trying to distinguish one, right? The little pet rock, just a rock, but now it's a pet rock, I guess, right? It's not like all the other rocks, and so that's kind of what sun is trying to do here. It's trying to distinguish them in some way, and so you get some of the musicians here: Garth Brooks, Bob Marley, Gordon Downey. Get someone like Chris Rock, just normal dudes, a lot of them. But somehow distinguished in some way. Um, and you got that Capricorn always has this sort of farmer quality, this man of the people sort of idea. And so you get these country singers, you get someone like Bob Marley, Rastafarian, right? Sort of Bob Marley. Alfred Elder is actually Interesting. There's some similarities in their philosophies of life. Guys like Alder and Bob Marley. Um, oh, I saw a lot of this. Sounds like a war with 9 marriages. I was like 9 marriages, 8 marriages, 7 marriages. These people have a lot of partners. Um, seeing the second pada is in Virgo, and so you're seeing more militancy coming in. The Marines, um, that's sort of getting in line for the even Burt Reynolds spent a bit of time in the army. Um, Pharaoh, Gina, Babas. Oh, it's interesting. Nathal Babas here. Um, Mathematicians. Oh, that's interesting, actually. A couple of these people, at least the ones I know personally, a few of them are kind of healers, really, trying to heal the masses in some way. I think the sun here as well, if we think of that sense of containment, it's like probably working with minerals to some degree, containing the intelligence. So I think there is a big struggle here to differentiate the sun and interesting. The sun in Shravan often has where's my words? Um, what was Alfred Adler's psychology? Inferiority complex. And I think that sort of starts to come here because the sun in Dhanishta, it's like that one person who is different from the crowd. And so that can kind of go both ways. Either they can become the leader of the crowd, or I think what often happens is they struggle with that. They struggle with being different. They there's something different. They don't always like it. They're trying to trying to make themselves sort of one of the crowd. Um, but there's definitely a struggle with that their unique abilities here. I think. Um, we get Darwin, Thomas Edison, great, a lot of physicists, a lot of physiology, the nerve impulses. Um, again, the nerves are traveling through a kind of a hollow tube, I guess. Um, and it's a sense also of the way the nervous system works. This is an Aquarius, so we have to consider the nervous system. It's kind of like all these ganglia, these hubs and nodes and and branches going out to the different directions in a way. So that's the nervous system until it gets to the skin. And maybe that's another part of the skin and anesthesia is that connection to the sense of feeling. It feels when it's struck. Something reverberates through the nervous system when you get hit in anesthesia, you could say. Um, yeah, it's funny here. People like Dr. Dre, Yoko Ono, Eckhart Tolle. Interesting to see someone act like Eckhart Tolle because his whole power of now comes through his Ashwini placements. And now we've kind of gone around. We're almost as far away from the now as we can get in Dhanishta. I don't think Dhanishtas are ever in the now. They're always somewhere else in time, in the past, in the future. The now isn't really their place. They've got to be planning ahead in a way. They've got to be one step ahead to a certain degree. And that's that sort of idea of sensors. They have to know what's coming um, in order to react to it, or know what's coming in order to act against or in accord with it, rather than being reactive. There is a lot of reactivity here, but still. So what else we got? One of my friends on here, he sent me a message the other day, and he's all he wanted to do was learn how to make cheese. And so he just sent me a message, and he finally got a place he's going to. First the UK. He's got a 4-month thing to make cheese, and then he's going to go to Italy and learn how to make more cheeses in Italy. Crazy friends I have. Um, but then I was looking at some of the other names around that, and a lot of these people are just kind of milking the system. The same as my friend is going to be milking those cows. They're kind of milking the system here to a certain degree. Um, Definitely milking the system. Just about everybody I know here is milking the system. Yeah, just about everybody. Even Thomas Edison. We give him this great. We give him all this. We'll give him all these credit for all these inventions, but Thomas Edison was running an invention factory basically. He had a whole bunch of people hired, just trying a whole bunch of stuff, and he was just milking the system really, and getting by on that system. That's kind of interesting. That works. Yeah, go ahead, Emmett.
Yeah, and like, and to bring it back to the like the drumming as well in a way, like, and like a Dhanishta is going to be like kind of paying attention to what the system is, and then finds what rhythm and what beat to bring into it to really optimize and get the most from it. So it's like they're not trying to take over, they're figuring out what it is and then find the drum beat that they can kind of get whatever they want or want to create from the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. The sun might be the one who's starting the beat. The sun here might be also talk about the cookie cutter, right? The sun might be the original mold or the original cutter, the first one, the first man in a sense. Um,
Yeah, and what makes sense with that too, like looking at Bill Russell and Michael Jordan, like those are two basketball players, and they're known as like the greatest basketball players because Bill Russell, there's nothing great necessarily about him, but like he won as many championships as anyone else in like sports history. So he was the first to kind of figure out how to win championships at basketball, how to figure out the system of basketball and how to take advantage of it. And Michael Jordan did it in his own way too. And Abraham Lincoln as well as like the ideal president, right? Like he just set
yeah,
that. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense.
yeah, there really is. Also, what you're saying about Bill Russell, and I'm not sure about some of the others, but it's not. Again, if you just won one championship, it's no big deal. But he won, I don't know how many, 8 or 10, a bunch of them, a whole bunch. And that's Dhanishta. It's a whole bunch of them. And that's usually what makes them significant is that multiplicity of them. Um,
Yeah, same thing for Michael Jordan, where like he won like his efficiency at winning championships. Like him and Bill Russell are the two top people when it comes to winning championships because I think they're like Bill Russell, I think won 11, so he's like 11-0, like no losses, and Michael Jordan, same things, like 6-0,
yeah,
no
yeah,
losses, you know. So like they really optimized winning.
yeah. And then I think that well, both those names too. It's like, and a lot of these names, I think there's a lot of because there's an echo involved here. So then there's going to be copycats kind of idea. Lots of copycats, lots of echo, that reverberation. So you don't just get one Dr. Dre. Now you go out in the rap world and there's a gazillion people who think they're Dr. Dre's. There's a gazillion people think that they're Michael Jordan. So that reverberation um, comes out through it.
It's like a role model reverberation in a way where it's like they set the model and then people try to hit that beat, hit that rhythm that they were able to hit.
Exactly that following, literally following. Um, yeah, I want to go through. I'll just go to Yeah, I didn't do much for Sun and Dhanishta. Dhanishta is one of these ones that's so difficult for us to go through because there's two sides to it, right? Like I said, I declared in Shravan. I don't know if you heard that, Dana. There are now 36 nakshatras. That was my Shravan declaration. My book will be the book of the 36 nakshatras and not 27. Um, just because I want to fuck with everybody. Um, maybe I have some Dhanishta. And my Navamsha, I got a bunch of Dhanishta placements. Um, while we're on the second side, let's just jump ahead here. Moon and Dhanishta. So the moon and Dhanishta, this is that comfort. This is our comfort zones with the moon here. Um, and these people are going to be more comfortable following the masses. And they're going to have a tendency, these are the folks that are going to probably try to drag everyone down to their level somehow. Um, it was like Brezhnev, the Soviet leader, right? Wanted everyone, he pulled everyone down to the level of being a serf, in a sense. Yeah, you get a bit of prostitution here, get a lot of copying.
Or
It's
up to
funny.
their level.
Well, yeah, I guess the niche is always moving both ways. So they're all trying to bring them up to their level, but I'm looking, most of them are bringing them down to their level, making others stoop to their level and sort of in order to work and in order to get things done. Um, it's interesting. Some economists, some bankers, some masters in commerce. Again, people that they know how to work with the numbers. Get a few engineers, martial art guys here.
Hmm. And I think you're right on the bring down to the level because especially there's Shudra caste, right? Which is the merchants, the artisans. So it's kind of like it's humbling, right? It's like come down,
Yes.
like be, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Be contained. Don't get outside of your, don't think outside of the box. Maybe the worst thing, worst thing a Dhanishta can do is start to think outside the box. Um, yeah. So very sort of cookie cutter that way. It's like when you get a good thing, they just keep going with that good thing. Don't change anything. Sort of idea here. Um, and I think with the sun and Mars here, they're not upward moving forces. So they might be more trying to pull people up to their level. Whereas the moon and Saturn and some of these others, these are downward moving forces. They want to bring everybody down to their level. Saturn, you'll see a lot of wealthy people in Saturn, but I think there's a sort of like, again, they had to stoop to a sort of lows in order to get that wealth. And we'll get to when Saturn's there. But it's like they're getting wealthy off, say, gravel, right? Or they're getting wealthy off coal. They're getting wealthy off the least significant things when Saturn's there. And that's sort of the magic of Saturn is because, well, it's able to turn those insignificant things into wealth, into money. Even just space, time and space become a commodity. And so you can make a lot of money that way. Um, so there is Gadeva, Pranamel, Heidi, Amy, who else we got? Randy. These are oh, that's interesting. A couple of them do the couple of these folks, because we're talking about being tied up a little bit with Dhanishta. And a couple of these people do that, not yoga, where they hang the silk things from the ceiling, and then they're like winding themselves up in silk. And I don't know. It's like, they call it a yoga now, but it's like they're suspended from the roof kind of yoga. Anyways, a few of these people, at least three of them with the moon and third pada, are doing this kind of yogas, kind of tying themselves up kind of thing. Um, and I think there's another thing with that. There's maybe a bit of a fad, uh, tendency to follow fads in Dhanishta. Again, it's that idea is if you have a good thing, just keep doing that. And so it's like someone came up with this yoga where they tie themselves from the roof and it became a fad. And so now it's being pushed forward. You can see that in a few of these people. They sort of started these fads that even with some of the music therapy, kind of the way it's done now, music therapy's been forever. If you want a good music therapist, find somebody who's been extensively trained in classical music. Listen to Mozart. You want musical therapy? Listen to Brahms. Don't go to Jenny on the corner who just bought her singing bowls. That's not music therapy, right? That's a fad. Someone making money, right? They found something that works and they're just going to replicate it as many times until it's completely out of juice. That's Dhanishta, right? It just wants to replicate it until there's no juice left. Um, yeah. So, especially Moon and Dhanishta can be like that. So, you can be very, very successful. That's where the success of Dhanishta comes from. Very successful. Because they can just grab onto anything that's working. A few of these other people are dealing with the ayahuasca in Central America. Quite a few of them doing ayahuasca. It's amazing. There's a lot of what I would call sexy tantrics here as well. Um, and I don't know if that's because that's a fad now as well, and so they're going with it. But there is that sort of openness, kind of somatic healing type stuff here as well. Like Candace Owens, we think of media and journalism, right? She does podcasts. I don't know what she's doing anymore, but she's the same thing. She takes a topic and she just squeezes every bit of juice out of it until there's nothing left, right? Until they're just talking. Nobody even hears them anymore on the end of it. Then they got to find a new topic, sort of idea. So that's really, we see a lot of that going on here. Oh, bear capsules, tablets, right? Pharmaceutical capsules. What really comes to mind is the little capsules, the ones that are full of all the little beads, like a gravel truck or like a whatever, a bean bag. Beanie babies came into this world while Saturn was transiting Dhanishta. So bean bags, right? That sort of stuff as well. Um, let's cruise ahead here again. So we get to Mars, we get the one who's exalted here. Again, I think that's that sort of like it really Mars is setting all of this into action, really coordinated and dynamic the way it moves things. Um, really, there's a side in Dhanishta, again, it's striking the drum. I think in order to provoke change, in order to provoke a equal but opposite reaction. The reaction isn't equal to the strike, right? I strike the drum, I'm not getting hit back. What's coming back at me is sound, but the force is different but equal to the strike. That makes sense. So that's that energy component. I think actually Einstein has placements here, and I think the whole E equals MC squared all relates with Dhanishta. It's that conversion of energy from one thing to another. Um, so there we go. So energy conversion. Got quite a few astrologers actually have this. Astrologers, astronomers. these sort of folks, at least Dhanishta placements. It's funny, Gordon Downey and Fred Rogers, these guys almost made their career out of being kind of average sort of people, but amongst that also very much distinguished. Um, Someone like Gordon Downey's an interesting one here. He's a Canadian singer. He was tragically hip. When I was a kid, Canadians went crazy for this. He was like Captain Canadian in a way. Interesting thing sort of happened to Gordon Downey, though, is as he got rich and before he died, he ended up dying of cancer. But before he died of cancer, he lost a lot of those. He really started to distinguish himself. He became kind of this crazy poet and dressed like a lot of the sun nature started to dress very unique, and he became the big star. Um, and so there was that conversion of energy, I think, with Mars here, going from being a very just a normal everyday a rock that's no different from any other rock to slowly going through all the tests and jumping through all the hoops until you get to a place where you can distinguish yourself and it's acceptable when the people aren't going to like kick you out because you're a weirdo. Um, and so there's that goes on here. Again, a lot of us, I don't know if it's um, astrology or astronomy, but astronomy is certainly quite significant here. And I think it is that sort of sense of you've got that, like in the sky, we've got the Donova, we've got the fixed stars, and everything revolves around that. But in regards to space, you've got the sun in the middle, and everything is revolving around that. But everything's moving in its own way, at its own time, at its own space. And so that's kind of how the timing is being set. And not just timing one thing, but timing multiple things, coordinating the movement of everything. And it's through that coordinated movement that something happens. There's a moment in time that is now. But it's because of not because of anything you're doing now. What you're doing now isn't making the now. What made the now is everything you did in the past. That's where the now came from. And so the future now is like what you do now might seem insignificant, but for the future, it's like if you mess up what you're doing now, if you really fuck things up, it's like putting a rotten apple in the load. Your whole future is ruined. Your whole future is over. And so the now might not seem significant, but you really got to pay attention to it. It's quite important. Don't mess up, really. Um, so get a lot of powerful women here. Zaza Gabor, Queen Elizabeth. Not a lot of women have Dhanishta placements. I don't know. I have made some effort when I'm pulling out the names to try to pull out women's names because of course there are going to be a lot more. Just going to be a lot more men. But I notice all the Dhanishta placements. Like I don't know why there just doesn't seem to be as many significant Dhanishta women somehow. I don't know. And the ones that are really, really powerful women, like Queen Elizabeth. Um, yeah. And again, with Mars, I think we are getting that distinctions coming out. Lily Wakazowski, transgender, transgender activist, I guess. Kira, psychoanalysis. A lot of psychology seems to be going on here. Psychology, psychoanalysis, all of this. And I think I would say maybe it's the social sciences, well, sciences, but social sciences as well. They want to compartmentalize everything, right? They want to break everything up to its parts and understand it in these small compartments. here's intelligence as opposed to creativity. And so there's all that compartmentalization going on with this. Supply chains type stuff. I don't want to call it supply chain because I think the chains are going to come more at the end of Aquarius, but it's certainly that not a hub. It's kind of hubs and nodes is what they're working around. So even you get like public transportation, you got the main bus stop in the middle of the city, then you get all these lesser bus stops around, sort of idea. If it's a really big city, you're going to have these in the different boroughs and the different neighborhoods. You'll have other, might not be as main of a bus stop as the main bus stop, but you're going to have these other places where all the buses are gathering, all these nodes, and then everything's going out from there. So you get that trucking, the whole sort of trucking industry is very Dhanishta. Again, when we get to the end of Aquarius, those trucks are being tied together, so it becomes a train. But here it's all sort of, there's a bit of looseness. Oh, the other thing, zoologists. I saw another friend that has this taxidermy, right? They're dealing with the skins and re-skinning things and that sort of thing. Dealing with what's sort of on the surface to a certain degree, and just working with what we have, making the most of what they have. Yeah, more of that. And I don't know here if it's just Vajrayana Tantra that is relating with Dhanishta, because it keeps coming. I keep saying Vajrayana, or what's what I call sexy Tantra started with Vajrayana Tantra, and so you're seeing a lot of that here. Yeah, a lot of that sort of sexual Tantra here. People working with that. I see sex everywhere. It's like Shiva. Shiva and sex are everywhere. So what can I say? Got to be a part of it in every nakshatra. It's like after I did the Shravan class, I did one of these because I think I did a whole Shravan class without once mentioning Vishnu. Though I did mention Shiva a few times. And so, anyways, that's one track mind in a sense, my Dhanishta mind, maybe just going forward like that. So jump through Mars, we'll get to Mercury here. Mercury is Mercury is the most coordinated. So in a sense, it's like Mercury and Dhanishta. In some way, I think these people are capable of doing two things at once, or moving two directions at once, and there's that really heightened coordination of doing multiple things at once. Very organized, and I think that's why we get quite a few musicians have this situation. Music directors or movie directors is what I was going to say. Film directors, these sorts of people. We talked about the cookie cutter. So there is some cutting in here as well, and I think that refers to the cutting and editing to a certain degree, because you'll cut out a section in a way, and so this is about the sections that are getting cut out and then put back together. Coordination is really big here with Mercury. Just lots of athletes, I guess. Lots of people who are really active. Trying to, I don't know. I get a sense that the Nishas are trying to change things. That's that Mars. They're looking for some kind of transformation. Um, and sometimes the transformation just comes from some practice, for example. Just do it every day and you'll get your result. Um, they're not looking for any like sudden not looking for that sudden transformation, that very slow, gradual sort of just keep doing it and the changes will come. Keep doing it and you'll see the effects over time. So there is an over time here. Um, yeah, a lot of people just a lot of people working with oil, working with aggregate. Um, yeah, lots of economists, lots of bankers seem to have this Mercury as well. Um, polytheism seemed to be a thing here as well to a certain degree. Um, they're not going to believe in one God. They probably believe in a whole bunch of gods. Um, again, it's like the machine has a whole bunch of different parts to it. And so the way they sort of, maybe that's also the Mercury, the way it, Mercury and Dhanishta, very point form, maybe very, sort of getting to the points very quickly, that Mercury and Dhanishta, but also talking about being tied down, that narrative of being tied down and weighed down. Um, I think that's a very, it's kind of almost a very potent talking point in politics, right? I'll stop wearing it. Well, it's all the red tape actually is in Dhanishta as well. I don't know if that's probably in Mercury. That red tape has to be cut through. And so the Mercury is very good at cutting through all of that red tape. The red tape or the ticker tape kind of thing, like at the bottom of a newsreel, there's that tape that's always moving, telling you whatever you need to know. There was another thing I saw with this, but it's almost like when you're typing in the old typewriters, there's a tape you would have to put in there, and the tape had the ink, and so what would happen is it was like a, oh, that's what it is. Oh wow. So you know those forms you have to fill out, and in between there's like that black sheet, and it'll automatically duplicate whatever you're writing. And that's the same thing the old typewriters have. The key would hit that tape, and the tape had the ink, sort of thing. Same as those forms that you have to fill out, and it presses. Um, and you get the impression of your pen on the second or even third form sometimes. And so those are those government forms where there's multiple, but just by filling out one, you're filling out multiple. Um, and so I think Mercury here especially deals with those sort of duplication of forms, duplication of the narrative. Um, even you could say like photocopying and copying. There's always going to be maybe also a sense of because Mercury's communication. So in politics, you repeat it enough and it becomes the truth. And I think that's in the Dhanishta, especially the Mercury and Dhanishta. That sense of the truth doesn't matter. The truth is over in Leo. It's not particularly significant to Dhanishta, but whatever's repeated enough times becomes the truth. So there's that sort of thing. Lots of economists here, lots of people working with numbers. Really, Mercury's really working numbers when it's in Dhanishta. If I would say, I would think the Mercury Aquarius Dhanishta looks much more business-like and number orientated, whereas the first two, it actually seems to be more, maybe it's the games, the baseball pitcher, the boxers, where they have to go through every test. to get to the elimination round kind of idea. So that's sort of organization as well of like the tournament kind of organization. Um, ahead. Should have eaten before class. I'm getting really hungry and running out of steam very, very quickly. Um, and I think Dhanishta is like the fuel to keep things going and the lubrication, that's sort of the maintenance, I guess, that just keeps things going. So in regards to that, like I talked about, I need food. I'm running out of fuel. I'm getting weak. So we need food, but we also need exercise. And that's really Dhanishta. It's those two sides. It's like I can eat to build up my energy, but then I go and just expend my energy to make myself hungry in a way. Um, and so there's again, it's that give and take. It's like some of one and one can go up and the other goes down, sort of thing. It's kind of working with those two levels. And so you need to find the right amount of food with the right amount of exercise. That's perfect. And if you're not, well, it doesn't have to be perfect. There's always some standard of deviation and then you stuff. But if you fall out of that way too much exercise, then you deplete all your energy. You're not making energy anymore. It's just being depleted. And so if you go to the other side of not doing any exercise, you're not making any energy. And so again, your energy gets depleted. And so you need to have just the right amount of food, the right amount of exercise, a little bit like that. So um Jupiter and Dhanishta on the Capricorn side, of course, is debilitated. And so we have to think that it's still basically debilitated in Aquarius as well. Um, and I think it's just like Jupiter doesn't like Saturn. Jupiter is theoretical, Saturn is facts. Um, and so this Jupiter and Dhanishta, this is where the rubber really meets the road to a certain degree, and theories get tested, ideas get tested. I found as I was looking at Dhanishta, I found as much success rate as I did failure rate. It goes either way, right? You get a test, you can fail it, pass or fail. And so we talked about, I mentioned Noah's Ark in Shravan, staying above the water. And I think in Dhanishta, something like Jupiter in Dhanishta is really, Noah's Ark is really being tested. It's really being put to the test. The beliefs are being put to the test here. And so, and the beliefs are also being, it's like Eckhart Tolle. He had this really great idea, the power of now. And this book came out. But the thing is now that Jupiter and Dhanishta, it's standardized. The power of now, it's like a fad belief. Like Jupiter and Dhanishta, if you can make everybody believe it's true, then that's true. If I believe it's true, then it's true. And so it does not very good for Jupiter at all. Um, Quite idealistic. They're a little bit out there. They can be good at building consensus. Um, but yeah, so they're really working hard to sort of prove their beliefs to a certain degree. Um, their belief kind of has to jump through the hoops and become standardized. It's like Eckhart Tolle, the power of now. Went from being a good idea and an interesting thing to contemplate to a number one bestseller for so many weeks in a row. It's a normal, average book. There's nothing to the power of now. It's very boring. Um, but somehow it distinguished itself, and that idea got made into a gospel in a sense. So there is that. Common sense becomes gospel, you could say, with Jupiter in this position. And they do. They got a lot of common sense. All these people, everyone I'm looking at, full of common sense. Lots of children, lots of wives. And I think on the Jupiter side, looking for numbers. Um, he who has the most children wins, sort of idea. So I'm going to cruise through this again fairly quickly. My weakness is going down. My brain, I think, doesn't even have fuel anymore. So Saturn and Nishta, very tight ship they're running. Some of the richest people in the world, the Rothschilds, Jeff Bezos, Howard Hughes. Um, it's interesting. A lot of it is all logistics. A lot working with logistics and transportation and moving goods and services. Was a lot. Howard Hughes was in the airline business. In case you don't know who he is, um, he was a bit of a playboy. Wrote some movies and stuff like that. Oh, Ayn Rand has this. I found this lovely thing about Ayn Rand. Chart is her chart is a study of the types of poor relationships influenced when habit. So there was a whole article, www.self-adoration, about how Anne Ryan ruined her marriage and the lives of all the people around her, refusing to recognize truth. Um, and this was kind of, I did this for humor, but maybe that is the problem with one of the problems that these people have with relationship is that they don't want to recognize the truth. Um, if we look, I only looked up the last Saturn and Dhanishta. We just had one recently that we can kind of remember, though. Uh, Things like the Waco siege happened again. That the sieges, that sense of holding people down, um, putting the squeeze on them, and of course in the Waco, eventually the police burned that place down and killed a whole bunch of people. 76 people died. Um, Mars Observer was also launched, but contact with the probe was soon lost. The mission was failed. Again, the scientists are making these things to go up in space. A probe, I think, is also a little bit very Dhanishta, that sense of probing for things. Um, so a lot of space shuttle missions were going on there. I think again that rocket is like a capsule. 7-man crew run up to repair the space Hubble scope. That was successful. Another one during 6 people pressurized lab for the first time. The pressurization came up a lot, like pressurized lab, compressors, air compressors. Um, Now, for example, Elon Musk's whole idea for like magnetic as well. Magnets are often used. Magnets are think are also relating somehow with Dhanishta because they also push and pull both. And we're starting to see now these trains or public transportation running on magnets so that it doesn't touch. The magnetic force is really good at reducing friction. Um, and so magnets generally, I think, seem to be something, especially with Saturn and Dhanishta, for that magnet sort of idea. Um, and the pressurization of the labs, air pressure, all of that sort of thing comes in here. It was last time Saturn was Dhanishta, the planes flew into the World Trade Center, killing a whole bunch of people. It was all, I think again, it's all about numbers with Dhanishta. There was all these big, devastating tsunamis and all kinds of stuff happened. Same, we just had a Saturn and across Dhanishta just fairly recently. Um, and so it's all about numbers with Dhanishta. A ferry sinking is no big deal. If it kills 1,000, it gets news. Bombing in Bombay, no big deal. Kills 300, it gets news. Earthquakes as well. Um, Earthquakes are interesting because I think it's from pressures from being held down is what sort of causes the earthquakes here. The treaty was signed making the European Union, again, taking all those countries, and now we have the whole union. North American Free Trade Agreement was signed while Saturn was transiting a Dhanishta placement. Israel Palestine, they also signed a peace agreement. It didn't really work out very well, but they tried. And so these are sort of experiments that they want to test, but a whole bunch of laws came involved. Regulating the movement of good across borders. And so that brings in the whole idea of membranes come in here. That movement of things across borders and across boundaries. In Canada, we had our first female prime minister while Saturn was transiting to Dhanishta. That turned out to be a failed experiment. She completely lost by a landslide. Nelson Mandela was working to dismantle the system of apartheid. He won his Nobel Peace Prize. He started a little bit before Saturn came into Dhanishta, but by the time it came to Dhanishta, he got his Nobel Peace Prize. His experiment was working. I think again the experiments were set in motion before Saturn got to Dhanishta, but this is where the test is being applied. This is where Noah's Ark meets the flood, sort of idea. Talked a little bit about milking it. Synthetic hormone to boost milk production was approved also in this period. I mentioned the Beanie Babies, Intel, Pentium processors. The whole World Wide Web was born when Mosaic was developed during Saturn transit through Dhanishta. And so that's all those connections of the web, the mosaic, a picture made up mosaic generally. That spinning, the cyclonic vacuum cleaner was made when Saturn was transiting here. That's sort of like the screw type motion, that revolving, maybe it is a revolving door as well. That's going here. And so it's kind of that revolving door. Once you get one government contract, it becomes a revolving door. Politicians, they go and they work for the public and then they go in the private. It's that revolving door between public and private as well. Michael Jackson accused of rape. The whole court of public opinion is in Dhanishta. And we saw that recently, the whole, even the whole division over COVID, mask wearing. It was all court of public opinion. There was God, I forgot about that. The whole Me Too thing happened during then too. Me Too is a whole court of public opinion. All of that sort of stuff. Michael Jackson accused for rape. It was the public debating all of this. Just now, we just had Russell Brand had his rape charges. They sound dubious. I didn't read a whole article on it or anything. But again, it's that court of public opinion comes out. Angels in America, Schindler's List for big movies that year. Again, it's that one person sort of distinguishing themselves in Schindler's List. Angels of America. I think that's about the movement of drugs in the U.S. Tears in Heaven. I get a sense that it's like that breaking point is hit. The breaking point is kind of found in Dhanishta. And I think that's why Tears in Heaven was so big that year. Well, Saturn and Dhanishta, can you see this? I don't know, my eye jumps straight out to Larry Nassar, child abuser. He was a physiotherapist, abusing his position, really. But Dhanishta is also like holding down or tying down to a certain degree. And this is really, I think, with Saturn here is really being held down and held down by the masses to a certain degree. There's some Saturn is always going to bring some worry into the system. it's almost like the tie downs are brittle in a sense. So the tie downs are, anyways, it's precarious somehow. Saturn's here. Um, and so, but that sense of being held down in a sexual idea, rapists and things like that, people are holding down their partner, holding back their partner. And we used it in a sexual way, but just generally, just holding back the other or holding that other person down somehow. Brad Pitt came out one time and he said, "Oh, I'm a farmer." He has shoving placements as well, but he makes wine, and so I think it's more that whole production cycle of everything and the movement of the logistics of moving those farm goods, basically. Um, Also, if we think of squeezing the juice out of things, that's grape making and wine making. They're not using the actual grapes, they're just squeezing the juice out of them. Um, it's funny. I can see a few of these people I know are like yoga coaching, this kind of coaching stuff. They're following a very formulaic in the way they're doing their coaching work. Um, and doing very, very well with it. Very, very well. And maybe it's that formula. Maybe there's just Saturn preserves the formula, and so it doesn't get squeezed entirely dry, copies it. Sanjay Rath, some Vedic astrologers, few Vedic astrologers, very formulaic, and there's a big part of astrology that is very formulaic that way. Talk about the formulas. I'm sure E equals MC squared belongs with Dhanishta. I'm sure of it. And so there's a lot of those like formulas. You just follow the formula and make it happen. Um, in that regard, there must be bakers here as well, really just following that recipe. Um, and it's like I think too, there's a sense like that one recipe is good for everyone. In Saturn and Dhanishta. I have to admit, I'm a little bit resentful of Saturn and Dhanishta, to be honest, because it is that they've made a system and they apply that system everywhere and it works. It gets them really, really rich. And they apply that same system to everyone. And maybe that's what it is with the Saturn is they can apply it to the most people it's possible. And I come on this other side of things where for me, I find the most important thing of healing is really not, I don't want to make everybody like everybody else. I want people to realize their own truth inside. I want them to differentiate themselves. I want to treat each person and each chart and each situation as if it is unique. And and so anyways, when they're not doing that, I'm kind of like, you can't just say that for everybody. Um so anyway, so you get that. Very cookie cutter in their approaches to healing, their approaches to anything they do. Just very formulaic. I'm here. I'm gonna wrap this up, Emmett. I know it's only an hour and a half or 2.5 hours, a little short. I'm gonna wrap it up now. My brain's not working. I need to get some food in my stomach. My my vessel is empty. Um and so I have nothing more to offer. I've depleted myself. So I thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Mahadev.
Mahadev.